Sarah Martinez sat alone at the small wooden table in the corner of Murphy's bar, her fingers wrapped around a glass of water that had long since lost its chill. The ice had melted hours ago, creating small puddles of condensation that she absently wiped away with a napkin. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a plain black t-shirt and jeans that did nothing to draw attention to herself. That was exactly how she wanted it. The bar was filled with the usual Friday night crowd. Construction workers unwinding after a long week, college students celebrating the end of exams, and a group of young men in their 20s who had been getting progressively louder as the night wore on. Sarah had been watching them for the past hour, noting the way their voices carried across the room, and how other patrons subtly moved away from their table. She recognized the type immediately. Entitled, aggressive, looking for trouble, but hiding it behind jokes and bravado. They reminded her of some of the worst recruits she had encountered during her years of service. The ones who thought being loud made them strong, who confused intimidation with leadership. "Another round over here," one of them shouted, his voice cutting through the general murmur of conversation. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with the kind of build that came from hours in the gym rather than real physical labor. His name was Derek, though Sarah had learned that simply by listening to his friends address him throughout the evening. "Keep it down over there," called Murphy, the bar's owner and bartender, a graying man in his 60s who had run this establishment for nearly 3 decades. "Some people are trying to have quiet conversations." Derek turned in his chair, his movements exaggerated by alcohol. "What did you say, old man?" Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She had come here seeking solitude, hoping to process the difficult day she had experienced at the VA hospital, where she worked as a counselor for veterans dealing with PTSD. Every day, she helped other former service members work through their trauma, but tonight she needed to work through her own. It had been exactly 3 years since the incident in Afghanistan that had ended her military career. 3 years since the ambush that had taken the lives of 4 members of her unit, and left her with physical scars that had healed and emotional ones that still ached on nights like this. "I said keep it down," Murphy repeated, his voice steady but firm. "This is a neighborhood bar, not a frat house." Derek's friends started to snicker, and one of them, a shorter man with bleached hair, stood up from his chair. "Maybe you need some help remembering who your customers are, Grandpa." Sarah watched as Murphy's expression shifted from annoyed to concerned. The older man had always been kind to her during her visits to his establishment. He never asked questions about why she sometimes came in and sat alone for hours, never pushed her to order more than water or the occasional coffee. He seemed to understand that some people just needed a quiet place to exist for a while. "Look, I don't want any trouble," Murphy said, holding up his hands. "Just asking you to be respectful of the other customers." "Other customers?" Derek stood up now, too, scanning the room until his eyes landed on Sarah. "You mean like her? The weird girl who's been sitting there all night, nursing one drink?" Sarah felt every muscle in her body tense. She had hoped to remain invisible, to work through her thoughts in peace, and then leave without incident. But she could see the trajectory this was heading in, and her training, both military and therapeutic, told her to either leave now or prepare for confrontation. The problem was, leaving felt too much like retreat. And after everything she had been through, everything she had survived, the idea of being driven out of safe space by a group of drunk bullies made something cold and hard settle in her chest. "She's been taking up a table for hours," the bleached-haired man added. "Maybe she needs to learn about sharing." Murphy moved out from behind the bar, his movements careful but determined. "That's enough. I think you boys need to settle your tab and head home." "We're not going anywhere," Derek said, taking a step closer to Murphy. "And I think you need to learn some respect for paying customers." Sarah made her decision. She stood up slowly, her movements economical and precise. The chair scraped quietly against the floor, but in the sudden tension of the bar, the sound seemed amplified. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, her voice calm and level. Derek turned to look at her, and she could see him taking in her appearance. Medium height, slim build, no obvious signs of threat. She watched as dismissal flickered across his features. "No problem that concerns you, sweetheart," he said, the endearment dripping with condescension. "Just having a conversation with Murphy here about customer service." "It looked like harassment to me," Sarah replied evenly. The bar had gone quiet now, other patrons sensing the shift in atmosphere. Sarah was aware of their attention, but she kept her focus on Derek and his friends, reading their body language, calculating distances and potential threats. Harassment, Derek laughed, but there was no humor in it. Lady, you don't know what harassment looks like. Actually, Sarah said, taking 2 steps closer. I'm pretty sure I do. Something in her tone must have penetrated Derek's alcohol-fueled confidence, because he paused, studying her more carefully. But his friends were still caught up in the moment, still feeding off the group dynamic that had been building all evening. Oh look, the bleached-haired one said. The quiet girl has some fight in her after all. Maybe she needs to be taught some manners, added a third member of their group, a stocky man with a neck tattoo. Sarah felt the familiar calm that always descended when a situation moved from potential to active threat. It was a feeling she remembered from patrols in Afghanistan, from training exercises, from the night everything changed. Time seemed to slow, and her awareness expanded to take in every detail of her surroundings. Murphy was behind Derek, and to his left, too close to the potential conflict zone. The other bar patrons were mostly seated at tables along the far wall, or at the bar itself, giving her room to maneuver if necessary. The front door was 15 feet away, but there was also a back exit through the kitchen that might be closer depending on how this played out. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said, keeping her voice steady. You're drunk, and you're looking for trouble. I'm trying to have a quiet evening. Murphy here is just trying to do his job. Why don't we all take a step back? Derek's face flushed red. Who the hell do you think you are to tell us what to do? Someone who's asking nicely before I stop asking nicely, Sarah replied. The words hung in the air for a moment, and Sarah could see Derek processing them, trying to decide if she was bluffing or if there was something more behind her quiet confidence. You know what? He said finally, his voice dropping to what he probably thought was a menacing whisper. I think you need to learn your place. He took a step toward her, and Sarah shifted her weight slightly, her body automatically moving into a ready position that would allow her to respond to whatever came next. Her hands remained at her sides, but every nerve was alert, every muscle prepared. Derek, Murphy said, his voice cutting through the tension. Don't do this. Just leave. All of you. No one needs to get hurt here. The only person who's going to get hurt, Derek said, not taking his eyes off Sarah, is Miss Tough Girl here, if she doesn't learn to mind her own business. Sarah looked at him steadily, seeing past the alcohol and bravado to the insecurity and anger underneath. She had encountered men like this before, both in civilian life and in the military. They used intimidation because they had never learned any other way to assert themselves, and they targeted people they perceived as weak because they were fundamentally weak themselves. I try to mind my own business, she said quietly. You made it my business when you started threatening Murphy. Threatening? Derek's voice rose again. I wasn't threatening anybody. We were having a conversation. That's not how I saw it, Sarah said. Well, maybe you need to get your eyes checked, the bleached-haired man interjected. Along with your attitude. Sarah turned her attention to him for just a moment, noting his position relative to Derek and the third man. If this escalated to violence, she would need to neutralize the most aggressive threat first, which was clearly Derek, while maintaining awareness of the other two. My attitude is fine, she said. It's your behavior that's the problem. Derek laughed harshly. Our behavior? Lady, we're just having drinks and talking. You're the one who inserted yourself into our conversation. You were intimidating an older man who was just trying to do his job, Sarah replied. That's not having drinks and talking. That's bullying. Bullying? The stocky man with a neck tattoo stepped forward. You want to see bullying? Sarah turned slightly to keep all 3 men in her line of sight. I want to see you all walk out that door and leave Murphy alone. That's not going to happen, Derek said. But I'll tell you what is going to happen. You're going to apologize for sticking your nose where it doesn't belong, buy us a round of drinks to make up for the trouble you've caused, and then you're going to sit back down at your little table and mind your own business. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. Not anger exactly, but a cold determination that she recognized from her years in the Corps. It was the feeling that came when negotiation was over and action was required. No, she said simply. No. Derek's voice rose to a shout. Did you just say no to me? I did, Sarah confirmed. I'm not apologizing, I'm not buying you drinks, and I'm not sitting down. I'm telling you one more time to leave Murphy alone and get out. Or what? The bleached-haired man demanded. Sarah looked at him calmly. Or I'll make you leave. The silence that followed was electric with tension. Every person in the bar was watching now, waiting to see what would happen next. Sarah could feel their attention, but she kept her focus on the 3 men in front of her, reading their body language, preparing for whatever came next. You? Derek's voice was filled with disbelief. You're going to make us leave? If I have to, Sarah said. Lady, I don't know what kind of movies you've been watching, but this is real life, Derek said. And in real life, little girls who mouth off to grown men get taught lessons they don't forget. Is that a threat? Sarah asked. It's a promise, Derek replied. Murphy stepped forward. Okay, that's enough. I'm calling the police. No, Derek said, not taking his eyes off Sarah. We're going to settle this right here, right now. Sarah nodded slowly. If that's how you want it. She could see Derek trying to process her calm acceptance, clearly expecting fear or backing down. When neither came, confusion flickered across his features before being replaced by anger. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, he said. Actually, Sarah replied, her voice steady and quiet, I think you're the one who doesn't understand the situation. What's that supposed to mean? Sarah looked at him for a long moment, weighing her options. She could still try to de-escalate, could still attempt to talk her way out of this. But she could see in Derek's eyes that he had passed the point of reason. He was committed to this confrontation now, his pride and alcohol-fueled confidence demanding satisfaction. It means, she said finally, that you've made a mistake. You've let your assumptions about me cloud your judgment. You see a quiet woman sitting alone, and you think that makes me vulnerable. You think that makes me an easy target. Don't you? Derek asked, a cruel smile spreading across his face. Sarah shook her head slowly. I told you, I'm Marine Combat Master. You surrounded me, unaware of my legend. The words were spoken quietly, almost conversationally, but they carried a weight that seemed to fill the room. Derek's smile faltered as he processed what she had said. You're what? United States Marine Corps, Sarah said clearly. Combat instructor, hand-to-hand specialist, 3 tours in Afghanistan. And you just made the mistake of threatening someone under my protection. Derek stared at her, and Sarah could see him trying to reconcile her calm demeanor and slight build with the words she had just spoken. His friends looked uncertain now, the group dynamic that had driven them this far beginning to fracture as doubt crept in. You're lying, Derek said, but there was less conviction in his voice. Am I? Sarah asked. Murphy, would you mind telling these gentlemen what you know about my background? Murphy, who had been standing frozen during the confrontation, cleared his throat. Sarah's been coming here for about a year, he said. Never causes trouble, always respectful. But I've seen the way she moves, the way she watches the room. She's military, no question about it. And from what I've heard from some of the other vets who come in here, she's someone you don't want to mess with. Derek looked around the bar, seeming to notice for the first time that several of the other patrons were nodding in agreement. A few were even smiling grimly, as if they knew something he didn't. I don't believe it, the bleached hair man said. She's just trying to scare us. Sarah reached into her back pocket slowly, making sure her movements were visible and non-threatening. She pulled out her wallet and extracted a military ID card, holding it up so Derek could see it. Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, she said. Marine Corps Combat Training Battalion. Want to see my discharge papers too? Derek stared at the ID, and Sarah could see the exact moment when the reality of the situation hit him. The color drained from his face, and he took an involuntary step backward. You're really a Marine? He asked, his voice smaller now. I really am, Sarah confirmed, putting the ID away. And right now you have a choice. You can apologize to Murphy, pay your tab, and walk out of here with your dignity intact. Or you can continue down this path and discover exactly what 12 years of military training looks like in practice. Derek looked at his friends, then back at Sarah. She could see him calculating, trying to figure out if there was a way to save face without backing down completely. This is bullshit, the stocky man with a neck tattoo said. I don't care if she's a Marine or not. There's 3 of us and 1 of her. Sarah smiled for the first time since the confrontation began, but there was no warmth in it. You're right. There are 3 of you. That almost makes it fair. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Sarah could see the last of Derek's confidence crumbling. Whatever he had expected when this started, it wasn't to find himself facing down a trained military combatant who showed no fear, no hesitation, and no indication that she was bluffing. We should go, Derek said suddenly, his voice tight. Derek, what the hell? The bleached-haired man protested. We're not backing down from some, we're leaving, Derek said firmly, cutting him off. Pay the tab. Now. Sarah watched as the 3 men fumbled for their wallets, throwing bills on their table with shaking hands. Derek kept glancing at her, as if expecting her to attack at any moment, while his friend seemed confused by his sudden change in demeanor. "This isn't over," the stocky man muttered as they headed toward the door. Sarah stepped into his path, and he stopped so suddenly that Derek bumped into him from behind. "Actually," she said quietly, "it is over. And if you ever come back here and cause problems for Murphy or any of his customers, you'll discover that tonight was me being polite." The man stared into her eyes for a moment, and Sarah let him see the steel beneath her calm exterior. After a few seconds, he nodded jerkily and hurried past her toward the exit. Derek paused at the door, looking back at her one last time. "I'm sorry," he said, and there was genuine regret in his voice. "We were drunk and stupid." "Yes, you were," Sarah agreed. "Don't let it happen again." After they left, the bar remained quiet for several long moments. Then, Murphy let out a shaky breath and walked over to Sarah. "Thank you," he said simply. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't stepped in." Sarah nodded, feeling the familiar aftermath of adrenaline beginning to make her hands tremble slightly. It was the right thing to do. "Can I buy you a drink?" Murphy asked. "A real one this time?" Sarah looked around the bar, noticing that the other patrons were still watching her with a mixture of respect and curiosity. The quiet sanctuary she had come seeking was gone, replaced by attention she didn't want. "Maybe another time," she said. "I think I should head home." As she gathered her jacket and prepared to leave, Murphy touched her arm gently. "Sarah, you know you're welcome here anytime, right? This is your place too." Sarah felt something ease in her chest, a knot of tension she hadn't even realized was there. "Thanks, Murphy. That means more than you know." Walking out into the cool night air, Sarah reflected on what had just happened. She had come to the bar hoping to process her difficult day in solitude, but instead had been forced to confront a situation that reminded her exactly why she had chosen to serve in the first place: to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. The encounter with Derek and his friends had awakened something in her that had been dormant since her discharge, something she had thought she might have lost forever. For the first time in 3 years, she felt like Staff Sergeant Martinez again, instead of just Sarah the counselor trying to forget her past. As she walked to her car, Sarah realized that sometimes the past didn't need to be forgotten or overcome. Sometimes it needed to be embraced, integrated, and used as a foundation for moving forward. Tonight had reminded her that her military experience wasn't just a source of trauma. It was also a source of strength. And tomorrow, when she went back to work at the VA hospital, she would carry that reminder with her as she helped other veterans find their own way forward. The night was quiet now, peaceful in a way that felt earned rather than given. Sarah drove home with the windows down, letting the cool air wash over her as she processed everything that had happened. She had thought her fighting days were over, but tonight had shown her that some battles never really end. They just change form. The enemy might not always be obvious, and the battlefield might not always be a foreign desert, but the mission remained the same: protect and serve, stand up for what's right, and never back down when others are counting on you. Sarah Martinez, United States Marine, was finally home. 2 weeks after the incident at Murphy's Bar, Sarah Martinez sat in her small office at the VA Medical Center, reviewing case files for the day ahead. The morning sun streamed through her window, casting long shadows across the stack of folders on her desk. Each folder represented a veteran struggling with the invisible wounds of war, and today she would guide them through another step in their healing journey. Her office was sparse, but comfortable, decorated with a few plants and photographs that created a welcoming atmosphere without being overly personal. The only hint of her military background was a single framed photo on her bookshelf, her unit in Afghanistan, taken just weeks before everything changed. A soft knock on her door interrupted her preparation. "Come in," she called, looking up to see Dr. James Chun, the head of the psychiatric department, standing in her doorway. "Sarah, do you have a minute?" Dr. Chun was a kind man in his 50s who had hired her 3 years ago when she was still struggling to find her place in civilian life. He had seen past her initial hesitation and recognized her potential to help other veterans transition. "Of course, what's up?" Sarah gestured to the chair across from her desk. Dr. Chun sat down, his expression more serious than usual. "I wanted to talk to you about a new case we're getting today. Marcus Thompson, 24 years old, Army infantry. He's been struggling since his discharge 6 months ago. Anger issues, nightmares, difficulty with crowds. His family is at their wits' end." Sarah nodded, familiar with the pattern. "What makes this case special?" A couple of things. First, he's been through 3 different therapists already. He doesn't trust easily, especially not civilian counselors. Second, he was involved in an incident last weekend that nearly resulted in assault charges. What kind of incident? Dr. Chun sighed. He was at a shopping mall with his sister when a group of teenagers started harassing an elderly veteran who was asking for donations for a homeless shelter. Marcus intervened, and things escalated quickly. Mall security had to break it up before it got physical. Sarah felt a familiar tightness in her chest. The description reminded her of her own recent experience at Murphy's Bar. The way protective instincts could override rational thought when someone vulnerable was being threatened. Where is he now? His sister brought him in this morning. He's waiting in the group room, but he's making it clear he doesn't want to be here. She's pretty much the only reason he agreed to come at all. Sarah looked at the case file Dr. Chun handed her, scanning the basic information. Marcus Thompson had served 2 tours in Iraq, received a Purple Heart for injuries sustained in an IED attack, and been medically discharged after developing severe PTSD symptoms. Dr. Chun, Sarah said slowly. Why are you bringing this to me specifically? You could assign him to any of our counselors. Dr. Chun smiled slightly. Because you understand something the others don't. You know what it's like to come home and feel like you don't fit anywhere. And, frankly, after what I heard about last weekend at Murphy's Bar, I think you might be exactly what Marcus needs. Sarah felt her cheeks flush. You heard about that? Sarah, this is a small community. Word gets around, especially when one of our staff members stands up to 3 drunk bullies and handles herself like a complete professional. Murphy's been telling that story to anyone who'll listen. It wasn't that big a deal, Sarah said, uncomfortable with the attention. Maybe not to you, but it was to Murphy. And it might be to Marcus too. He needs to see that strength and service don't have to end just because you're not wearing a uniform anymore. Sarah considered this. Working with veterans was always challenging, but working with someone who actively resisted help required a delicate approach. She had been in Marcus's position once, angry, lost, and convinced that no one could possibly understand what she was going through. All right, she said finally. I'll take the case. But I want to meet with his sister first, get a better understanding of the family dynamic. She's here with him. Lisa Thompson, 27, works as a nurse at City General. From what I can tell, she's been his primary support system since he got back. Sarah spent the next hour reviewing Marcus's military records and psychological evaluations. The picture that emerged was of a dedicated soldier who had been profoundly affected by the realities of combat. His unit had been ambushed during a routine patrol, resulting in the deaths of 2 soldiers and severe injuries to Marcus and several others. The similarities to her own experience were uncomfortable. Like Marcus, she had been part of a tight-knit unit that had been shattered by an unexpected attack. Like him, she had struggled with survivor's guilt and the feeling that she should have done more to protect her brothers and sisters in arms. When she felt ready, Sarah made her way to the group room where Marcus and his sister were waiting. She paused outside the door, taking a moment to center herself and push aside her own memories. This session was about Marcus's healing, not her own. She knocked gently before entering. Lisa, Marcus? I am Sara Martinez. Lisa Thompson stood immediately, a woman with dark hair and worried eyes who bore a strong resemblance to her brother. Ms. Martinez, thank you so much for agreeing to see us. I know Marcus has been difficult with other therapists. Marcus remained seated, his arms crossed over his chest. He was a stocky young man with close-cropped hair and the kind of hyper-vigilant posture Sarah recognized from her own early days in therapy. His eyes swept the room constantly, cataloging exits and potential threats even in the safety of the medical center. Just Sarah is fine, she said, taking a seat across from them. And Marcus, I'm glad you're here, even if you don't want to be. My sister made me come, Marcus said, his voice flat. I told her this was a waste of time. Maybe it will be, Sarah agreed, earning surprised looks from both siblings. But maybe it won't. Why don't we find out? Lisa started to speak, but Sarah held up a gentle hand. Actually, Lisa, would you mind giving Marcus and me a few minutes to talk? You can wait in the lobby if you'd like, or Dr. Chun said there's a cafeteria on the 2nd floor. Lisa looked uncertain. Are you sure? He's been pretty hostile with the other. I'll be fine, Sarah said confidently. Trust me. After Lisa left, closing the door behind her, Sarah and Marcus sat in silence for several long moments. She could see him studying her, trying to figure out what made her different from the other therapists he had encountered. So, Marcus said finally, "What's your story?" "Another civilian shrink who thinks she understands what we've been through." Sarah considered her response carefully. She had learned that with veterans, especially resistant ones, authenticity was crucial. They could spot insincerity from a mile away, and any attempt to pretend understanding she didn't have would immediately destroy any chance of building trust. "United States Marine Corps," she said simply. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Discharged 3 years ago after my unit was hit by an IED outside Kandahar. Marcus's posture shifted slightly, his attention sharpening. "Marines, huh? Staff sergeant. Combat instructor before I deployed. Spent most of my time teaching hand-to-hand combat and tactical awareness to new recruits. And now you're a therapist?" Sarah nodded. "Now I'm a therapist. Turns out fighting external enemies is easier than fighting the ones that come home with you." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding that she might actually know what she was talking about. "How many did you lose?" he asked quietly. The question hit Sarah like a physical blow, bringing back memories of faces she would never see again, voices she would never hear except in her dreams. She took a steadying breath before answering. 4. Rodriguez, Patterson, Williams, and Hayes. Rodriguez was going to name his first kid after me if it was a girl. Patterson was 2 weeks from finishing his tour. Williams was our medic. He died trying to save the others. And Hayes was 20 years old and still sent half his pay home to his grandmother in Detroit. Marcus stared at her, and she could see that her willingness to speak their names, to honor their memory, had created the first crack in his defensive armor. 2, he said after a long pause. Jackson and Morales. Jackson had pictures of his twin daughters taped to the inside of his helmet. Morales was going to propose to his girlfriend when he got home. They sat in shared silence, 2 combat veterans connected by loss and the weight of memories that no one else could truly understand. Sarah felt the familiar ache in her chest, the grief that never fully went away, but had learned to coexist with hope. The other therapists, Marcus said finally, they wanted me to talk about my feelings. They used words like trauma response and emotional regulation. They treated me like I was broken and needed to be fixed. "Are you broken?" Sarah asked. The question seemed to surprise him. "What? Are you broken?" "Fundamentally damaged beyond repair." Marcus considered this. Sometimes it feels like it, but feeling broken and being broken are different things, Sarah said. "I felt broken for a long time after I came home. I felt like the person I used to be had died in that desert, and whoever came back wasn't really me anymore." "What changed?" Sarah smiled sadly. "Nothing for a while. I went through the motions, medical appointments, therapy sessions, job interviews. But inside I was still stuck in that moment when the world exploded around me. I kept thinking that if I could just get back to who I was before, everything would be okay. But you can't go back," Marcus said. "No, you can't. And that's the hardest thing to accept. The person you were before combat, that person is gone. But that doesn't mean the person you're now is broken. It just means you're different." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his interest clearly engaged now. "How do you deal with it? The anger, the nightmares, the feeling like you're always waiting for the other shoe to drop." "Some days better than others," Sarah admitted. "But I've learned that the goal isn't to forget what happened or to pretend it doesn't affect me. The goal is to integrate those experiences into who I am now and find ways to use them constructively. Like becoming a therapist, like standing up for people who can't protect themselves, like using the skills and strength I develop in service to help other veterans find their way forward." Marcus was quiet for a long time, processing what she had said. Sarah could see him thinking, weighing her words against his own experiences. "The incident at the mall," he said eventually. "I saw this old guy, must have been 75, asking for donations for homeless vets. These punk kids were giving him a hard time, calling him names, knocking over his collection box. And something in me just snapped." "What did you feel in that moment?" "Rage. Pure, white-hot rage. Like I was back in Iraq, and someone was threatening my unit. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything except move to protect him." Sarah nodded. "That's not unusual. Combat veterans often have heightened protective instincts, especially when it comes to other service members or people they perceive as vulnerable. But I could have hurt those kids, really hurt them. If my sister hadn't been there, if mall security hadn't shown up, but they did show up. And you didn't hurt anyone. You controlled yourself even when everything inside you was telling you to act. Barely, but you did. That takes strength, Marcus. That takes the same kind of discipline and training that made you a good soldier. Marcus looked skeptical. It doesn't feel like strength. It feels like I'm losing control. Tell me about the nightmares, Sarah said, changing direction slightly. Marcus tensed. What about them? Do you dream about the attack that killed Jackson and Morales? Every night. Sometimes multiple times a night. I wake up in a cold sweat, heart pounding, convinced I'm back there. In the dreams, do you try to save them? Always. I run toward them, try to warn them about the IED, try to pull them to safety. But I'm never fast enough. I always watch them die. Sarah felt her own memories stirring. Similar dreams where she desperately tried to change the outcome of that day in Afghanistan, where she fought against an inevitability that her sleeping mind refused to accept. What if I told you that those dreams aren't just trauma responses? What if they're also your mind's way of trying to process survivor's guilt? Survivor's guilt? The feeling that you should have died instead of them, or that you should have been able to prevent their deaths. It's incredibly common among combat veterans, and it can manifest in ways that feel like you're losing your mind. Marcus stared at her, and she could see recognition dawning in his eyes. You have them too. The dreams. I have them too, Sarah confirmed. And for a long time, I thought they meant I was weak or broken or somehow responsible for what happened to my unit. But you don't think that anymore? Now I think they're evidence of how much I cared about my Marines. The fact that their deaths still affect me, that I still wish I could have saved them. That's not weakness. That's love. That's honor. That's what makes us human. Marcus sat back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. Sarah could see that her words were resonating with him in a way that previous therapy sessions hadn't. The anger, he said after a while. It's not just about the nightmares or the guilt. It's about feeling useless. In Iraq, I had a mission. I had brothers who counted on me, and I had skills that mattered. Here, I feel like I don't have a purpose anymore. What kind of work were you doing before you deployed? Construction. Nothing special, just general labor. But it paid the bills and I was good with my hands. And now? Marcus shrugged. Now I can't handle being around groups of people. I get anxious in crowds, paranoid about potential threats. The construction sites are too chaotic, too noisy. I lasted 3 days of my old job before I had a panic attack and walked off. Sarah nodded understandingly. Readjusting to civilian work can be one of the biggest challenges veterans face. The structure and clear mission of military life doesn't exist in most civilian jobs. So what am I supposed to do? Live off disability payments for the rest of my life? Let my sister support me like I'm some kind of invalid. What if I told you there were options? Ways to use your military skills and experience in civilian context that might feel more meaningful. Marcus looked skeptical. Like what? Security work, for one. Not mall cop stuff, but serious protective services. Veterans with your background are in high demand for executive protection, facility security, even private military contracting. I don't want to go back overseas, Marcus said quickly. You don't have to. There are plenty of domestic opportunities. Or what about law enforcement? Many police departments actively recruit veterans, and your combat experience would be valuable. I thought about that, but after everything that's been in the news about police, it's complicated, I know, but maybe that's exactly why departments need veterans like you. People who understand the weight of responsibility that comes with authority, who know the difference between necessary force and excessive force. Marcus was quiet again, considering possibilities he clearly hadn't thought about before. Sarah could see the wheels turning in his mind, the first stirrings of hope that maybe his military experience was an asset rather than a burden. What about you? He asked suddenly. How did you end up here? Why therapy instead of something more active? Sarah had been expecting this question, and she had learned that with veterans, honesty was always the best policy. Because I tried the active route first. After I was discharged, I got a job with a private security firm. Bodyguard work, mostly. I was good at it, really good. But it wasn't fulfilling. I was using my skills to protect people who could afford protection instead of people who actually needed it. So you switch careers? I went back to school. Got my master's degree in counseling psychology. It took me 3 years, and there were times I wanted to quit every day. But I kept thinking about all the veterans who were struggling the way I'd struggled, who needed someone who understood what they were going through. And that's enough for you? Just talking to people? Sarah smiled. Marcus, 2 weeks ago, I was sitting in a bar when 3 drunk guys started harassing the owner. They were bigger than me, younger than me, and there were 3 of them. But when it came down to it, my training kicked in, and I was able to handle the situation without anyone getting seriously hurt. Marcus leaned forward, interested. What happened? Sarah gave him a brief account of the incident at Murphy's bar, watching as his expression shifted from skepticism to respect to something approaching admiration. You faced down 3 guys by yourself. I did what needed to be done, just like you did at the mall. The skills we learned in the military don't just disappear because we're civilians now. We just have to find new ways to use them constructively. So therapy is your way of still serving. Therapy is my way of still fighting, Sarah corrected. The enemy just looks different now. Instead of fighting insurgents in Afghanistan, I'm fighting the demons that follow veterans home. Instead of protecting Marines on patrol, I'm protecting veterans from their own worst impulses. Marcus stared at her, and she could see that something fundamental had shifted in his perception of both therapy and his own situation. I want to try, he said quietly. I want to see if this can work. It's not going to be easy, Sarah warned. Recovery isn't linear. There will be good days and bad days, setbacks and breakthroughs. Some sessions you'll want to walk out, and some days you'll feel like giving up entirely. But you think I can get better? Sarah looked at him steadily. Marcus, you served 2 tours in one of the most dangerous regions on Earth. You survived an IED attack that killed 2 of your brothers. You came home, and you're still fighting, still trying to find your way. You're here, in this room, willing to try something new even though it scares you. If that's not strength, I don't know what is. For the first time since she had met him, Marcus smiled. Not a big smile, but genuine. When do we start? We just did, Sarah said. The real work begins next week, but today you took the most important step. You decided you were worth fighting for. As they scheduled their next appointment, and Marcus went to find his sister, Sarah reflected on the session. She had seen something in Marcus that reminded her of herself 3 years ago. Lost, angry, convinced that no one could understand what he was going through. But she had also seen something else. The spark of a warrior who hadn't given up, who was still willing to fight for something better. That spark was all she needed to work with. The rest, she knew from experience, would come with time, patience, and the understanding that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about finding ways to carry it forward with honor. Walking back to her office, Sarah felt the familiar satisfaction that came from making a real connection with a struggling veteran. It was the same feeling she had experienced after successful missions in Afghanistan, the knowledge that her skills and experience had made a difference in someone's life. Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez might have traded her uniform for civilian clothes, but her mission remained the same: protect and serve, stand up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, and never leave a fellow warrior behind. The war might have ended for her, but the fight continued, just on a different battlefield. 6 months into their therapy sessions, Marcus Thompson had made remarkable progress. The angry, defensive young man who had first reluctantly entered Sarah's office had slowly transformed into someone who could discuss his experiences without immediately shutting down. The nightmares still came, but less frequently, and he had developed coping strategies that helped him manage the worst of his symptoms. Sarah watched him now as he sat across from her, no longer rigid with hypervigilance, but relaxed enough to make genuine eye contact during their conversations. Today's session was particularly important because Marcus had been accepted into a police academy training program, a goal they had been working toward for months. I start next week, Marcus said, unable to hide his excitement despite his attempts to appear casual. 26 weeks of training, then probationary period if I make it through. How are you feeling about it? Sarah asked, though she could already see the answer in his improved posture and clearer eyes. Nervous, excited, scared I'll mess it up somehow. Marcus paused, then smiled slightly. But also like I might finally have a purpose again. Like maybe all the stuff that happened in Iraq doesn't have to define me forever. Sarah felt a familiar warmth in her chest, the satisfaction that came from watching someone reclaim their life from trauma. It was never going to define you forever, Marcus. You were always going to be more than what happened to you over there. I know that now. But 6 months ago, Marcus shook his head. 6 months ago, I thought I was broken beyond repair. If Lisa hadn't dragged me in here, if you hadn't understood what I was going through, you would have found another way, Sarah said firmly. Maybe it would have taken longer, maybe it would have been harder, but you're a fighter. That's what makes you who you are. They spent the rest of the session working through Marcus's concerns about police academy training, developing strategies for managing stress and anxiety in high-pressure situations. By the time he left, Sarah felt confident that he would not only succeed in the program, but excel at it. After Marcus's departure, Sarah had a brief break before her next appointment. She used the time to update his case files and reflect on his progress. His transformation reminded her of her own journey from broken veteran to functional civilian, though his path had been different from hers. Marcus had found his way back to service through law enforcement, while she had found hers through therapy. Both paths were valid. Both honored their military experience while channeling it toward protecting and helping others. It was proof that there wasn't just one way to heal from combat trauma. There were as many paths as there were veterans willing to walk them. A knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting to see her next scheduled patient. Instead, Dr. Chun entered, followed by a woman Sarah didn't recognize. She was tall and elegant, probably in her 40s, with graying hair pulled back in a professional bun and sharp eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. "Sarah," Dr. Chun said, "I'd like you to meet Colonel Patricia Reeves, retired Marine Corps. Colonel Reeves has a proposition for you." Sarah stood immediately, old habits causing her to almost snap to attention before she caught herself. "Colonel, it's an honor to meet you." Colonel Reeves smiled and extended her hand. "Just Patricia, please. I've been out of the Corps for 5 years now. Dr. Chun tells me you're doing outstanding work with combat veterans here." "I do my best," Sarah said, gesturing for them to sit. "What brings you to the VA?" "Actually, I'm here because of your work with Staff Sergeant Thompson and several other veterans who've passed through your care. Word gets around in the veteran community, and your success rate is attracting attention in some interesting circles." Sarah felt a mixture of pride and apprehension. "What kind of attention?" Dr. Chin leaned forward. "Patricia represents a new program that's being developed jointly by the Department of Veterans Affairs and the Department of Defense. They're looking for qualified therapists to work with a very specific population of combat veterans." "What kind of veterans?" Sarah asked. Colonel Reeves's expression grew serious. "Special operations personnel, Delta Force, Navy SEALs, Force Recon Marines, Army Rangers. Elite units with the highest rates of PTSD and the lowest rates of successful civilian reintegration." Sarah felt her heartbeat quicken. "Why me?" "There are therapists with more experience, more advanced degrees." Because, Patricia said, most of them have never been in combat. They understand trauma theoretically, but they've never experienced the specific challenges that special operations personnel face. You have combat experience, you understand military culture, and most importantly, you've successfully transitioned from warrior to healer yourself. Plus, Dr. Chin added, your approach works. Marcus Thompson was considered a lost cause by 3 previous therapists. Now he's about to start police academy training. That kind of success doesn't go unnoticed. Sarah considered what she was hearing. Working with special operations veterans would be incredibly challenging. These were individuals who had been trained to never show weakness, never admit failure, never ask for help. Their psychological defenses would be even stronger than those of regular combat veterans. "Where would this position be located?" she asked. "That's the interesting part," Patricia said. "It's not a traditional clinic setting. We're establishing a residential treatment facility in Colorado, in the mountains outside Denver. Veterans would live on-site for intensive 6-month programs, combining traditional therapy with adventure therapy, skills training, and gradual reintegration support. Like a retreat? More like a mission," Patricia corrected. "These aren't broken soldiers coming to be fixed. They're elite warriors learning to adapt their skills to civilian life. The goal isn't to make them forget their military experience. It's to help them leverage it in constructive ways." Sarah felt a stirring of interest. The approach aligned perfectly with her own philosophy about veteran therapy. "What will my role be?" "You be the head of combat trauma therapy," Dr. Chin explained. "You design and implement treatment protocols, supervise other therapists, and work directly with the most challenging cases." "The most challenging cases?" Colonel Reeves nodded grimly. "Veterans who've been through multiple failed treatment programs. Individuals with high security clearances who can't discuss their experiences with civilian therapists. Operators who've seen things and done things that most people couldn't imagine." Sarah thought about her own experiences in Afghanistan, the classified operations she still couldn't discuss even in therapy sessions. She understood the unique isolation that came from carrying secrets, from being unable to fully process experiences because of security restrictions. There's something else, Patricia added. We've been tracking incidents involving special operations veterans in civilian settings. Bar fights, confrontations with police, situations where highly trained individuals have found themselves in conflict with untrained civilians. We think many of these incidents could be prevented with proper support and guidance. Sarah immediately thought of her own encounter at Murphy's bar, how her training had allowed her to de-escalate a situation that could have turned violent. You want to teach them control, not suppression. Exactly. You understand the difference between burying trauma and integrating it. That's what these veterans need. Integration, not suppression. Sarah was quiet for several long moments, processing the offer. It would mean leaving her current job, relocating to Colorado, and taking on the most challenging veteran population in the country. But it would also mean the opportunity to develop cutting-edge treatment protocols and work with individuals who had sacrificed everything for their country. I need to know more about the program structure, the other staff members, the specific patient population, she said finally. Of course. We're prepared to fly you to Colorado next week to tour the facility and meet with the team. No commitment required, just an opportunity to see what we're building. And if I decide to join, you'd start immediately after giving appropriate notice here. Full relocation assistance, competitive salary, and the chance to write the book on special operations trauma therapy, literally. We're planning to publish our protocols and findings to help other programs nationwide. Dr. Chin smiled. Sarah, this is the kind of opportunity that comes along once in a career. You be pioneering an entirely new approach to veteran mental health. Sarah looked at both of them, weighing the possibilities. Her work here at the VA was fulfilling, and she had built good relationships with patients like Marcus. But the opportunity to work with special operations veterans, to develop new treatment methods, to potentially prevent the kinds of incidents that too often ended in tragedy, that was compelling in a way she hadn't expected. I'll take the trip to Colorado, she said. No promises beyond that, but I'm interested enough to learn more. After Colonel Reeves and Dr. Chin left, Sarah sat alone in her office, staring out the window as she processed what had just happened. The offer represented everything she had hoped for when she first decided to become a therapist, the chance to work with the veterans who needed help most, to make a real difference in their transition to civilian life. But it also represented a major life change. She had built a comfortable existence here, with her regular patients, her apartment, her routine visits to Murphy's bar. Starting over in Colorado would mean leaving behind everything familiar, just as she had when leaving the military 3 years earlier. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Marcus. First day of academy tomorrow. Couldn't have done this without you. Thank you. Sarah smiled, feeling the same pride she had experienced watching young Marines successfully complete their training. That feeling, the knowledge that her work was making a real difference in veterans' lives, was what had drawn her to therapy in the first place. The next few days passed quickly as Sarah tried to focus on her regular duties while her mind kept drifting to the Colorado opportunity. She found herself researching special operations units, reading about adventure therapy techniques, and imagining what it would be like to work with veterans who had operated at the very highest levels of the military. When Friday arrived, she made her usual evening visit to Murphy's bar. The older man greeted her warmly, as he had every week since the incident with Derek and his friends. The usual spot? Murphy asked, gesturing toward her preferred corner table. Actually, Sarah said, surprising herself, I think I'll sit at the bar tonight. Murphy's eyebrows rose slightly, but he simply nodded and began preparing her coffee. Sarah settled onto a bar stool, noting how different the perspective was from here. Instead of observing the room from a distance, she was part of it now, connected to the activity around her. You seem thoughtful tonight, Murphy observed as he set her coffee down. Big decision to make, Sarah admitted. Job opportunity in Colorado. It would mean leaving everything here behind. Murphy nodded slowly. What kind of opportunity? Sarah found herself describing the program, the chance to work with special operations veterans, the innovative approach to trauma therapy. As she spoke, she realized that talking about it out loud made her more excited about the possibilities than nervous about the unknowns. Sounds like exactly the kind of work you were meant to do, Murphy said when she finished. Maybe, but It would mean starting over again, building new relationships, proving myself all over again. Sarah, Murphy said gently, you proved yourself the first night you walked in here. You proved yourself again when you stood up to those bullies. And from what I hear, you prove yourself every day at the VA. Colorado would be lucky to have you. As if on cue, the bar's front door opened, and Marcus walked in with a young woman Sarah didn't recognize. He spotted her immediately and approached with a smile. Sarah, I didn't expect to see you here. He looked different in civilian clothes, more confident and relaxed than she had ever seen him. I wanted you to meet my girlfriend, Amy. Amy, this is the therapist I told you about. Amy, a pretty woman with kind eyes, extended her hand. Marcus has told me so much about you. I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for him. Marcus did the hard work, Sarah said, but she felt a warm glow of satisfaction. How's the academy going? Amazing. Challenging, but amazing. I feel like I'm finally doing something that matters again, you know? Using my training for something positive. Sarah nodded, understanding exactly what he meant. It was the same feeling she was hoping to find in Colorado, the sense of purpose that came from using one's skills and experience to make a real difference. They chatted for a few more minutes before Marcus and Amy headed to their own table, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. Watching Marcus with his girlfriend, seeing how far he had come from the angry, defensive young man she had first met, reinforced her belief in the power of proper treatment and support. But it also made her realize that her work with Marcus was essentially complete. He had the tools he needed now, the confidence and purpose that would carry him forward. Soon, he wouldn't need her at all, and that was exactly as it should be. The thought crystallized her decision about Colorado. Here at the VA, she was helping veterans who came to her for treatment. In Colorado, she would have the opportunity to develop new methods that could help thousands of veterans across the country. It was the difference between treating individual symptoms and potentially preventing them entirely. By the time she left Murphy's bar that night, Sarah had made her decision. She would take the trip to Colorado, and unless she discovered major problems with the program, she would accept the position. 3 days later, Sarah found herself on a plane to Denver, watching the Rocky Mountains grow larger through the window as they approached the airport. Colonel Reeves had provided detailed information about the facility during the flight, a converted retreat center situated on 500 acres of wilderness, designed to provide both privacy and opportunities for outdoor therapeutic activities. The drive from the airport took them through increasingly rural terrain until they finally turned onto a winding mountain road that led to the facility. Sarah's first impression was one of serene beauty. Log buildings nestled among pine trees, with breathtaking views of snow-capped peaks in the distance. Welcome to Haven Point, Patricia said as they pulled up to the main building. This will be home base for the next 6 months if you decide to join us. Sarah stepped out of the car and took a deep breath of the crisp mountain air. The altitude made her slightly lightheaded, but the setting was undeniably impressive. She could see immediately how this environment might appeal to combat veterans, isolated enough to provide security and privacy, but beautiful enough to inspire hope and healing. How many veterans will be here at any given time? She asked as they walked toward the main building. 24 maximum, divided into 4 cohorts of 6. Each cohort goes through the program together. They live together, train together, heal together. The small group dynamic builds the kind of bonds these veterans understand from their military experience. Inside the main building, Sarah was introduced to the rest of the staff, a mix of mental health professionals, adventure therapy specialists, and former special operations personnel who served as peer counselors. The diversity of backgrounds was impressive, and everyone she met seemed genuinely passionate about the program's mission. The tour continued through residential quarters, therapy rooms, a fully equipped gym, and outdoor activity areas designed for everything from rock climbing to wilderness survival training. Everything was designed with military precision, but civilian comfort, creating an environment that would feel familiar to special operations veterans while supporting their transition to civilian life. The most important stop, Patricia said as they reached a building set slightly apart from the others, is the Trauma Therapy Center. This is where you'd be spending most of your time. The therapy center was state-of-the-art, with individual counseling rooms, group therapy spaces, and specialized areas for EMDR therapy, biofeedback training, and other cutting-edge treatment modalities. But What impressed Sarah most was the attention to detail that showed real understanding of the veteran population they would be serving. The rooms were designed with multiple exits, clear sight lines, and comfortable but not overly soft furnishings. Everything about the space communicated safety and control, critical factors for individuals who had been trained to constantly assess threats and maintain tactical advantage. This is where the real work happens, Patricia explained. Individual therapy sessions, group processing, family counseling when appropriate. But unlike traditional programs, everything here is built around the idea that these veterans are resources, not patients. They have skills and experiences that can be assets in civilian life. They just need help figuring out how to apply them. Sarah spent the rest of the day meeting with staff members, reviewing proposed treatment protocols, and learning about the specific challenges facing special operations veterans. By the end of the day, she was convinced that this program represented the future of veteran mental health care. That evening, over dinner with Patricia and the other senior staff, Sarah made her decision. "I want to be part of this," she said. "When can I start?" Patricia smiled. "How does 6 weeks sound? That would give you time to wrap up your current cases and relocate." "Perfect," Sarah said, feeling a familiar excitement she hadn't experienced since her early days in the Marine Corps. "I think this is exactly where I'm supposed to be." As she flew back to Virginia the next day, Sarah reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few days. 6 months ago, she had been content with her routine at the VA, helping individual veterans work through their trauma one session at a time. Now she was about to embark on a completely new chapter, one that would challenge her in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But the challenge didn't frighten her. If anything, it energized her. For the first time since leaving the military, she felt like she was about to undertake a mission that was truly worthy of everything she had learned and experienced as a Marine. Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez was ready for her next deployment, even if this time the battlefield would be in the human heart rather than a foreign desert. 8 months into her tenure at Haven Point, Sarah had established herself as the backbone of the trauma therapy program. The converted retreat center in the Colorado mountains had become her second home, and she had developed deep relationships with both the staff and the veterans who came through their doors. On this particular morning, Sarah stood in the main conference room preparing for what would be one of their most challenging intake briefings yet. Colonel Reeves sat at the head of the table, surrounded by the core staff members who handled the most difficult cases. The atmosphere was tense in a way that had become familiar when they were about to discuss a new arrival with particularly complex needs. "Gentlemen, ladies," Patricia began, "today we're discussing our next admission. Master Sergeant David Chun, Army Special Forces, 12 years of service, 4 combat deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq." Sarah opened the thick file in front of her, scanning the initial psychiatric evaluation and military records. Even at first glance, she could see this case would be unlike anything they had handled before. "What makes this one special?" asked Dr. Martinez, the facility psychiatrist, and no relation to Sarah despite the shared surname. Patricia's expression grew grave. "Master Sergeant Chun was part of a classified operation that went wrong 18 months ago. His entire 12-man team was killed in an ambush. He's the sole survivor, and due to the classified nature of the mission, he's been unable to discuss the details with any of his previous therapists." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. The scenario was eerily similar to her own experience in Afghanistan, though on an even more devastating scale. Losing an entire unit was the kind of trauma that could break even the strongest person. "Previous treatment history?" she asked. "Extensive," Patricia replied, flipping through pages of documentation. "He's been through 3 different inpatient programs, worked with 7 different therapists, tried every medication combination in the book. Nothing has worked. He's been on administrative leave for over a year now, and the Army is considering medical discharge." "What's his current mental state?" "Severe PTSD, survivor's guilt so intense, it's borderline suicidal ideation, complete social isolation. He hasn't spoken to his family in months, hasn't left his apartment except for medical appointments. The only reason he agreed to come here is that his commanding officer made it clear this was his last chance before discharge." Sarah studied the photograph attached to the file. David Chun appeared to be in his early 30s, with the lean, hard look of a special operations soldier. Even in the official photo, she could see the 1,000-yard stare that came from seeing too much, losing too much. "Any family support?" "Parents in California, both professors at UC Berkeley. They tried to maintain contact, but he shut them out completely. No siblings, no romantic relationships that have survived his last deployment. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. What makes you think we can succeed where 7 other therapists have failed? Patricia looked directly at Sarah. Because Sarah understands what it means to lose a unit. Because she knows what it's like to carry classified experiences that can't be shared. And because she's proven she can reach veterans that others have written off. Sarah felt the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. Every case was important, but this one felt different. David Chun represented everything she had dedicated her career to helping. A warrior broken by service to his country, isolated by experiences too classified to share, failed by a system that didn't know how to help him. When does he arrive? She asked. Tomorrow morning. And Sarah? He specifically requested that no one from his previous treatment programs be contacted for background. He wants a completely fresh start. The rest of the briefing covered logistics and initial treatment planning, but Sarah's mind was already working on the challenge ahead. How do you reach someone who has been failed by the system repeatedly? How do you build trust with a veteran who has learned that opening up only leads to disappointment? That evening, Sarah walked the facility's perimeter trail, a habit she had developed during her time at Haven Point. The mountain air was crisp and clean, and the isolation helped her process difficult cases. Tonight, her thoughts kept returning to Master Sergeant Chun and the similarities to her own experience. The difference was that she had lost 4 Marines in her unit. Terrible, but not unprecedented. Losing an entire 12-man special operations team was almost unimaginable. The Survivors Guild alone would be overwhelming, but adding the classified nature of the mission created a perfect storm of isolation and trauma. As she completed her circuit of the trail, Sarah made a decision. Traditional therapeutic approaches hadn't worked with David Chun, which meant she would need to try something different. Instead of starting with talk therapy, she would begin with action, showing rather than telling him that she understood what he was going through. The next morning, Sarah positioned herself in the main lobby as the transport vehicle arrived. Through the windows, she could see a figure in civilian clothes sitting rigidly in the passenger seat, staring straight ahead with the disciplined posture of someone fighting to maintain control. When David Chun entered the building, Sarah's first impression was of barely contained energy, like a coiled spring under enormous pressure. He was shorter than she had expected, probably around 5'8", but with the compact, dangerous look of someone who had been forged by years of combat. His eyes swept the room constantly, cataloging exits and potential threats even in the safety of the treatment facility. Master Sergeant Chun? Sarah approached him with the confident stride she had learned in the Marine Corps, extending her hand in a firm handshake. I'm Sarah Martinez, head of trauma therapy. Welcome to Haven Point. David's grip was strong, but brief, and she could see him analyzing her just as carefully as she was studying him. Ms. Martinez, I was told you have military experience. Staff Sergeant, United States Marine Corps. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Sarah kept her response crisp and professional, avoiding the touchy-feely approach that many therapists favored. With special operations personnel, respect had to be earned through competence, not empathy. Marines, David's expression shifted slightly, showing the first hint of interest since his arrival. Combat MOS, combat instructor before deployment, then infantry afterward. Lost 4 Marines in an IED attack outside Kandahar in 2021. The simple statement hung between them, and Sarah could see David processing the information. She had given him just enough to establish credibility without overwhelming him with details. I'm sorry for your loss, he said quietly, and she could hear that he meant it. I'm sorry for yours too, she replied. 12 is a number that's hard to carry. David's composure cracked for just a moment, surprise flickering across his features. None of his previous therapists had mentioned the full extent of his loss so directly. How did you? I read your file. I know what happened, David. Not the classified details, but the important part. You lost your entire team, and you survived. That's the kind of weight that breaks people if they try to carry it alone. David stared at her, and Sarah could see him struggling with whether to trust this new person who seemed to understand something that others had missed. Look, Sarah continued, I know you've been through this dance before with other therapists. I know you've told your story, tried their exercises, taken their medications, and none of it has helped. So here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to start with a standard intake interview where I ask you how you're feeling and you give me the responses you think I want to hear. What are we going to do? We're going to take a walk. There's a trail that leads up to an overlook about 2 miles from here. Good view, quiet, private. We'll walk and talk, or just walk if that's what you prefer. Sometimes the best therapy happens when people aren't sitting in an office pretending everything is clinical and controlled. David considered this for a long moment. You're not like the others. No, I'm not. The others haven't been where you've been. They haven't lost people the way you've lost people. They haven't carried the weight of classified operations that they can never fully discuss. I have. Something in David's posture relaxed slightly. All right, let's walk. The trail to the overlook was steep enough to require focus, which Sarah had learned was beneficial for veterans dealing with intrusive thoughts. Physical activity helped ground them in the present moment while providing a natural framework for conversation. For the first mile, they walked in comfortable silence. Sarah could sense David's hypervigilance gradually decreasing as they moved further from the facility and deeper into the wilderness. Out here, with clear sight lines and no crowds, he could relax his guard slightly. How long have you been here? David asked as they paused at a stream crossing. About 8 months. I came from a VA hospital in Virginia where I was doing traditional therapy. This program is different, more intensive, more focused on integration than just management of symptoms. Integration, the idea that your military experience doesn't have to be something you recover from. It could be something you build on. The skills that made you an effective special operations soldier don't disappear just because you're not in uniform anymore. David was quiet for several minutes as they continued climbing. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. What if those skills are the problem? What if everything that made me good at my job is what's keeping me from functioning now? Sarah recognized the question behind the question. It wasn't really about skills. It was about identity, about whether someone who'd been trained to kill could ever truly integrate into peaceful civilian life. Tell me about your team, she said instead of answering directly. David stopped walking so suddenly that Sarah had to turn back to face him. I can't. You know that. Classified. I'm not asking about the mission. I'm asking about them. As people. As soldiers. As your brothers. David's jaw worked silently for a moment, and Sarah could see him struggling with how much to reveal. They were the best. Every single one of them was someone I would have trusted with my life. Someone I did trust with my life. Every day for 3 years. What were they like? Sanchez was our medic. Best combat medical training I've ever seen, but he also played guitar and wrote songs for his daughter. Rodriguez was our communications specialist. Could make any piece of electronic equipment work, no matter how damaged. He was also the funniest person I've ever known. Always had a joke, always could make us laugh, even in the worst situations. As David talked, Sarah could see some of the tension leaving his shoulders. This was what she had been hoping for, getting him to remember his teammates as people rather than just casualties. Williams was our demolitions expert. Quiet, methodical, but he could blow a door or disable a vehicle with surgical precision. And Thompson, David's voice caught slightly. Thompson was my second in command. We'd served together for 6 years. He had my back in every situation, and I had his. Until I didn't. What happened? Sarah asked gently. David resumed walking, his pace faster now, as if he could outrun the memories. Bad intelligence. We were told the building was empty except for our target. It wasn't. They were waiting for us. I was first through the door, which should have meant I was the first one shot. But the shooter hesitated for maybe half a second when he saw me, and Thompson pushed me aside. The bullet that should have killed me killed him instead. And the rest. Explosives. The whole building was rigged. I was blown clear, barely conscious. By the time I could move again, it was over. All of them. Gone. They had reached the overlook now, a rocky outcropping that provided spectacular views of the valley below. Sarah sat down on a boulder and gestured for David to join her. Why do you think you survived? She asked. Bad luck. Wrong place at the wrong time. If I'd been 2 feet to the left, or if Thompson hadn't pushed me, I'd be dead with the rest of them. That's not what I asked. Why do you think you survived? David stared out at the mountains, his hands clenched into fists. I don't know. I've been asking myself that question every day for 18 months. What if I told you that the answer isn't random chance or bad luck? What if there's a reason you're still here? Like,